How was I supposed to know that instant would alter my life forever? It was just another regular day until I stepped into that room. When I noticed the door was slightly ajar, something inside me shifted. In mere moments, I could have turned around and ignored it. But I didn't, because at that very second, as I registered what I was witnessing, I understood that nothing would ever return to the way it was before. And yes, I was to blame, because I was the one who initiated it, the one who failed to put an end to it. George was at work. The house was silent. But from above, I caught faint noises drifting down. Elliot was in his bedroom. At first, I didn't give it much thought, just a young man lost in his own world. But perhaps he'd enjoy a cup of coffee. A small chat might be nice. As I ascended the stairs, I tried to pinpoint the source of the sounds. The closer I got to his room, the more I noticed that the door wasn't fully shut. I inhaled deeply, about to call out to him. But then my gaze landed on Elliot. He was seated on his bed, laptop resting on his lap, its bright screen illuminating his face. His fingers were moving, and initially, I assumed he was watching something thrilling, maybe an action-packed movie. But as I stepped forward, shifting my angle, I felt my blood drain from my face. That was the moment it hit me. I understood precisely what Elliot was doing. My eyes caught the reflection on his screen, and a cold wave crashed over me. This was unexpected. This was something I hadn't meant to see. Elliot reacted instantly, scrambling to pull himself together, hastily lowering the volume on his laptop. But it was already too late. The moment had happened. Our eyes locked, and his face flushed a deep shade of red, the humiliation in his expression impossible to miss. I'm sorry, he mumbled, averting his gaze. I felt paralyzed. I, the door, I began, though I had no clue what I was even trying to say. A strange heat coursed through me. I was embarrassed, yes, but my thoughts were a chaotic blur I couldn't quite grasp. Quickly, I stepped out of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Pressing my hands to my face, I struggled to steady my breath. What the hell just happened? I whispered to myself. What had I done? How could I have been so reckless? But was I truly the only one to blame? Stop it, Darlene, I scolded myself. Yet the turmoil within me wasn't solely about what I had witnessed. Elliot was no longer a child. He was 23 now. But I was also 47, a woman all too familiar with the sting of shame. I had never found myself in a situation like this before, but I understood all too well the weight of embarrassment. Frozen in the hallway, my heart still thundering, I ran my fingers through my hair in an effort to compose myself. Then Elliot emerged at the doorway. Adjusting the collar of his shirt, he cleared his throat, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. Darlene, I'm sorry. I thought I had shut the door, he said, his voice uncertain but genuine. I quickly shook my head, looking away. No, it's actually me who should apologize. I should have knocked before coming in, I blurted out, speaking too fast, unsure of what else to say. Silence, but not just any silence. We had lived under the same roof for years, yet we had never looked at each other quite like this. Never had there been this kind of tension between us. I should go downstairs and start dinner, I said abruptly, turning toward the stairs. My voice was unsteady, but I forced myself to keep it together. Elliot said nothing. He simply watched me as though trying to piece something together in his mind. Before things truly escalated between us, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and listen to the full story. I promise, things are about to get a lot more intense. Until that evening, not a single word passed between us. No texts, no glances, not even meaningless small talk. But in that silence, something was shifting, whispering that nothing would ever be the same. At dinner, we sat at the same table, yet neither of us could bring ourselves to make eye contact. The only noise filling the space was the soft clinking of silverware against our plates. We needed to talk, to break this unbearable tension, and we both knew it. That night faded into the next day, and then the one after that. On the surface, everything appeared normal. But deep down, we both understood. Nothing was normal anymore. The silence between us only made the unspoken tension grow stronger. Then, one afternoon, Elliot sat beside me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but it was clear. He wanted to fix things. Darlene, about the other day, I feel awful. I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. Please, I don't want this to ruin things between us, he said, his voice both anxious and sincere. I inhaled deeply, No matter how bizarre and unexpected this was, I had to put him at ease. Offering a small smile, I gave a slight shrug. Oh, Elliot, trust me, I've had plenty of embarrassing moments over the years, I said. Then I shared a few of them with him. As he listened, the tension in his shoulders eased and a small smile broke through. The humiliation in his eyes dulled just a bit. For a moment, it seemed like everything had been smoothed over. But deep down, I knew the truth. This hadn't erased anything. If anything, our conversation had completely blurred the lines between us. And I could feel it. Things were about to go much, much further. Elliot let out a quiet chuckle, dropping his gaze to the table. I guess we're even now, he murmured. I frowned slightly, turning toward him. What do you mean? I asked, curiosity lacing my voice. For a split second, his expression changed, like he had just realized he'd said something he shouldn't have. He rubbed the back of his neck, hesitating. But he had already let the words slip, and now there was no taking them back. He exhaled deeply, his gaze shifting away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted, I've seen you the same way. You just never knew. A jolt of electricity surged through my body. I froze for a brief second. What? I whispered as the weight of his words settled over me. Elliot's face was flushed, yet he continued speaking. I never mentioned it before because I was too embarrassed, he admitted. But I've never been able to forget. Honestly, it was my little secret, something I couldn't get out of my head. My heart was racing, an unfamiliar heat spreading through me, a sensation I didn't quite understand, but I knew something had shifted. Elliot's confession wasn't just a simple admission, it broke through every unspoken barrier between us. I met his gaze, and he held mine. By now, we both realized this wasn't an ordinary conversation. The air between us had grown heavy, thick with something unspoken. From that moment forward, everything changed. There had always been a space between us, an invisible line neither of us had ever crossed. But suddenly, that line had disappeared entirely. Without even being aware of it, I found myself spending more and more time with Elliot. Small moments, casual conversations that seemed meaningless. Yet each one only deepened the tension growing between us. We even started watching movies together. In the past, we'd always kept our distance, but now there was an unspoken force pulling us closer. Something neither of us acknowledged, yet both of us felt. At times, when Elliot rested his arm along the couch, or when my hand brushed against his leg, or when our laughter blended together, I felt something stir inside me, but I forced myself not to dwell on it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to shake the restlessness gripping me. My thoughts refused to settle, circling back to one thing, Elliot. This had to stop. I needed to reestablish a boundary. If Elliot had feelings for me, I had to confront it directly and put an end to it. Determined, I climbed out of bed, my heart hammering wildly. My body moved on its own, carrying me to Elliot's room. His door was slightly open, dim light from within casting a soft glow into the hallway. As I stepped inside, my eyes found him. He was asleep. But in that moment, my attention wasn't on him. It was on something else, something undeniable. My breath caught, my body locking in place. Seeing him like that sent a storm of emotions surging through me. I shouldn't have been looking. I should have turned and left instantly. But I didn't. For several seconds, I just stood there, trying to process what I was feeling. Then, abruptly, I pulled away. Something deep inside me stirred. Something I couldn't suppress. But I had to push it aside. I retreated to my room and lay back down. But nothing felt the same anymore. That night, I had no idea just how much more complicated things were about to become. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fight the growing connection between us. Each day, the line between right and wrong became harder to define, and the force pulling us together only strengthened. I didn't even realize how far things had already gone. But what I did know was that turning back was becoming impossible. Then one night, Elliot came home like that, completely drunk. The noise from the door, the things he accidentally knocked over, it could have woken George. But I knew how difficult it was to rouse him from sleep. Without hesitation, I rushed out of my room, heading straight for Elliot. I barely had time to fix my clothes before I was standing right in front of him. His eyes were unfocused, a lazy smile curving his lips. "Darlene, are you real?" he mumbled, his words slurred but somehow sincere. I inhaled deeply and grabbed his arm. "Elliot, you can't go upstairs like this. We need to be quiet," I urged. But Elliot didn't move. His gaze remained locked onto my face, studying me. You know, you're really beautiful, he murmured, his voice low, thoughtful. Have you always been this way? Or did I just never notice? For a split second, I froze, but I quickly pushed past it. That's enough, Elliot, I said firmly. Come to the kitchen. I'll make you some coffee. I led him there slowly, hoping to help him sober up. But as I moved around, preparing the coffee, I could feel his stare lingering on me. Something inside me felt unsettled, unraveling in a way I couldn't quite explain. Elliot settled into a chair watching me. But then, suddenly, the cup slipped from his grasp, spilling across the counter. Ah, Elliot, you need to be more careful, I said in a hushed voice, quickly grabbing a towel to clean up the mess. But Elliot just smiled, his expression soft. Were you always this sweet? I hurriedly wiped down the counter, feeling a strange urgency. We couldn't stay here much longer. George was asleep upstairs, but with Elliot in this condition, we couldn't risk making more noise. All right, we're going upstairs, I said, guiding him toward the stairs. But be quiet. Once we reached his room, his movements grew clumsier, less controlled. He needed to change his clothes, but he was too out of it to manage on his own. At first, I hesitated, considering turning away. But when I saw him struggling to remove his shirt, my hands instinctively moved to help. As my fingers brushed the buttons of his shirt, Elliot's breathing slowed. In that instant, the air between us changed. The silence became thick, the tension almost tangible. I knew exactly what was happening, and yet, at the same time, I had no idea. Elliot was watching me differently. This was one of those moments, one that couldn't be undone. He hesitated as he changed, his hands falling to his sides. Then he locked eyes with me. That was when I realized my own breath had quickened. The room was so still, the air pressing down on us, making it difficult to breathe. I'm done playing this game, Darlene, he said. His voice was quiet at first, but there was certainty behind it. I stared at him, unmoving. My heart pounded, but I couldn't figure out what he meant. Are you? He asked, his voice deepening. We saw each other once, and that's it. His expression was unreadable. You don't think about it at all? I know it lingers in your thoughts before you sleep. A shiver ran down my spine, causing me to instinctively step back, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. Elliot, this isn't right, I stammered, my voice shaking. Elliot's lips curved into a small smile, but it wasn't innocent. We passed the point of deciding what's right a long time ago, Darlene, he said. Stop pretending. Then he moved closer, one step, then another, until he was so near that I could feel his breath against my skin. His hand lifted, fingertips grazing softly along my cheek. I wanted to turn away, but I didn't, because deep down I knew he was right. Then Elliot's lips met mine. The silence, the tension. Everything was answered in that one moment. The thoughts that had been circling in my mind fell away, my doubts dissolving into faint whispers. I hadn't pushed Elliot away, and the truth was, I had never wanted to. My hands trembled, yet I didn't resist. And when I saw the determination in Elliot's eyes, I knew there was nothing left to hide. Swallowing hard, I took a slow, deep breath and let the straps of my clothing slide from my shoulders. You're right, Elliot, I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. Let's stop pretending. Closing the space between us completely, I lay back against the bed, my heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. There was no turning back now. Elliot leaned over me, pausing for a moment to hold my gaze. Then he smiled. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his voice warm, steady. Everything is exactly as it should be. I turned my head away as another shiver passed through me. Even if I couldn't fully admit it to myself, I knew how long I had been waiting for this moment. Still, the words escaped my lips before I could stop them. Elliot, I'm a little scared, I confessed, my breathing uneven. Because of a few big things, I added softly. Elliot simply smiled, as if my hesitation didn't bother him. Maybe he even liked it, or maybe it was just the alcohol. Leaning in, his voice dropped to a whisper. George mustn't wake up. I knew what he meant. There had to be silence. Something inside me stirred. Something enormous. I had to fight to keep myself quiet, to stop a sound from escaping. Elliot looked at me, his voice soft but certain. I know, darling. Everything is fine, and so are you. What did he know? I think he understood. Maybe he had already figured it out. I couldn't help it. I closed my eyes, my hands gripping the sheets tightly as my body trembled. I covered my mouth with one hand, desperate not to make a sound. Elliot was so intoxicated he didn't seem to care about anything. And yet somehow, this only made everything feel more intense. The excitement of the moment, the weight of everything else, the overwhelming sensation of something immense. Elliot was breathless, exhausted, and his face was flushed. "Elliot, you're red. We have to hurry," I managed to say. "Okay," he murmured. "Okay." But he didn't stop. He kept going, again and again. And again. I lost myself in it. I wasn't even myself anymore. Eyes squeezed shut, I exhaled shakily. "Whatever you want, Elliot," I whispered. "Whatever you want." Elliot must have liked hearing that because he let go completely. And it was too much. The heat between us was overwhelming. Quickly, I eased Elliot down into his bed and pulled the blanket over him. Then I locked his door. I needed to shower, to calm down completely. I had no idea what would come next. What had just happened? As I stood under the water, I tried to process it, but unease crept into me. And yet, when I stepped out, my mind felt strangely clear. Oddly enough, I actually felt calm. I couldn't even bring myself to feel guilty. My body was as relaxed as my thoughts. Silently, I got dressed, climbed into bed, and drifted to sleep as if nothing had happened. But the truth was, this had been nothing more than a fleeting moment. An impulsive rush of reckless desire. Yet, nothing was ever that simple. And this? This wouldn't stay simple either. It didn't end here. It couldn't. Bigger things were coming, more intense, more consuming. And in the end, George was going to find out everything. Raindrops drummed impatiently against the glass, their soft, persistent tapping aligning with the rhythm of another storm, the one raging silently inside my chest. That night, for the first time in what felt like ages, I found myself alone. My husband, Anderson, had left on a business trip for a few days, and without him, the house felt unbearably empty. I had been reading, but at some point I had drifted off without noticing. The book lay open beside me, its pages exposed, the blanket sliding toward the mattress's edge. Only a single lamp was left on, its warm golden glow casting a gentle shimmer across my skin. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, I became aware of the door slowly creaking open. At first, I assumed I was imagining it, but I wasn't. Liam stood there, framed by the stark white light from the hallway, which outlined his figure and sharpened his features. His broad shoulders were slightly hunched, making him seem both younger and older than his 19 years. His damp black t-shirt clung to his chest, his dark curls sticking to his forehead, glistening as if he had been caught in the rain. Droplets trailed down his face, falling onto the wooden floor, tiny marks left behind. He was watching me. His gaze flickered to where the strap of my nightgown had slipped off my shoulder, lingering for just a second. Maybe longer. My pulse jumped. Quickly, I yanked the blanket up over me, but it was too late. The sensation of his stare had already left its imprint on my skin. "Aunt Clara," he murmured, his voice quiet, barely more than a breath. It had always felt unnatural to hear him call me that. Liam was Anderson's ex-wife's cousin's son. His father had later married my sister, which made him part of our family in some convoluted way, though he had never quite felt like he belonged, at least not until last summer. One day, he had arrived at my doorstep, a backpack slung over his shoulder and a haunted expression in his eyes. "My parents' divorce was loud," he had said. I hadn't asked for details. I had simply let him in. From that moment on, Liam had been in my life. And now, here he was, standing alone in my room past midnight. A chill ran through me, though not from the cold. "Why are you here?" I whispered. Liam took a step closer, the wooden floor groaning softly beneath his weight. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice lower now, rougher around the edges. That was when it hit me. He wasn't a boy anymore. The way he looked at me now held no trace of innocence. There was something deeper, something darker. "I keep thinking about things." The word lingered in the quiet between us, growing heavier by the second. And in that silence, I knew exactly what he meant, because I had been thinking the same. Those fleeting moments in the kitchen when our fingers had brushed, the way his gaze would settle on me when he sat alone on the balcony at night, the times I had caught him watching me from the terrace, his cigarette burning like a tiny angry star in the dark, the sharp jolt in my ribs when he had accidentally called me Clara instead of Aunt Clara, then blushed. I remembered all of it. But those moments were supposed to be buried, forgotten. "Liam, you shouldn't be here," I said. My voice lacked the conviction it should have carried. Slowly, he lowered himself onto the edge of my bed. The mattress sank under his weight, and something inside me faltered. I turned my head away, but I could feel his breath, warm and near. His damp jacket brushed against my blanket, sending a shudder through me. "You're shaking," I pointed out, though I was the one trembling. "Yeah," he whispered, but there was a hint of a smile in his voice. His fingers lifted a stray lock of hair from my cheek, tucking it behind my ear. As he did, his fingertips grazed my jawline, light as a whisper. My breath caught. Deep down, I knew how wrong this was. But the rest of me was burning. "Liam," I breathed his name, though I wasn't sure if it was a warning or an invitation. His thumb traced along my lower lip. "I've wanted to do this since the day I got here," he admitted. His confession hovered between us, raw and dangerous. Outside, thunder split the sky, and for just a moment, I wondered, would we survive whatever came next? This night was different. Liam was here in my room, sitting at the foot of my bed, his eyes locked onto mine. There was a storm inside him. I could sense it. But the most dangerous part? There was one inside me too. I studied him, struggling to steady my breathing. The rain drummed against the windows, wrapping around us, pulling us deeper into the night. His shoulders sagged slightly, exhaustion evident in his gaze. But there was something else. He was waiting. "You feel bad?" I said carefully. "And you're lonely?" Liam looked away, silent. I could have used this moment to act like the responsible adult, the mature woman. I could have played the part of the caregiver. But some part of me, the part I wasn't ready to confront, knew this moment mattered to me just as much. "You can sleep here tonight," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "In my room." Liam's head snapped up, eyes meeting mine. Hesitation flickered across his face. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. "Really?" I swallowed. "Yes, it'll be good for you." But deep down, I knew what I felt had nothing to do with what was good for him. I just needed to convince myself that it did. I was offering comfort to a boy who felt alone, but in reality, this was also my way of escaping my own solitude. Liam was young, strong, and unfamiliar, not even a real relative. Sharing this night with him felt like stepping through a forbidden doorway within myself. A voice inside warned me to stop, yet another, deeper and far more dangerous, murmured, "Yes." When he lay down on the opposite side of the bed, the gap between us felt like a boundary, yet it did nothing to contain the emotions stirring inside me. I shut my eyes, attempting to steady my breathing, but I was intensely aware of his presence. His nearness was something I could sense in every fiber of my being. Would this night remain as it was? Perhaps for now, but whatever was destined to unfold had not yet reached its conclusion. When morning arrived, I woke to find the space beside me empty. My eyes blinked open as my breath grew uneven. I instinctively pulled back, raising my head. The blanket had slid away from me. My nightgown was disheveled, its strap slipping further off my shoulder. I sat still for a few moments, unmoving. What had happened? A sudden wave of uncertainty welled up inside me. Could it be? No. Stop it, Clara. I scolded myself, my voice sharp and firm. It wasn't possible. It shouldn't have been possible. Yet the thrill bubbling beneath the surface at the mere suggestion of it was undeniable. Quickly adjusting my nightgown, I forced the thoughts away. He had been next to me as we slept. That was all. Nothing had happened. Nothing had happened. Then the door creaked open, and Liam stepped inside. He wore nothing but a towel, droplets of water trailing down his chest, his damp hair tousled, his expression calm yet unfocused. "I was sweating a lot this morning," he murmured, running a hand through his wet strands, the edge of his towel shifting slightly under his fingers. "Did I come into your room last night? I must have been really out of it. Thanks for looking after me." My gaze fixed on him. That was it? That was all? A faint ripple of disappointment surfaced within me, but I quickly suppressed it. He had seen me, how I had looked as I slept, the way my nightgown had shifted, the way I had lain in bed. He had seen everything. The realization sent a wave of conflicting emotions, embarrassment mixed with something else, something unshakable, rushing through me. Forcing myself to stay composed, I quickly averted my eyes and offered him a small smile. "It was nothing, Liam, really." But that was a lie. Pretending it hadn't affected me, ignoring the pull between us, trying to extinguish the fire kindling inside me, it was all part of a game, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep playing. We prepared breakfast together, moving around the kitchen in quiet synchronization. There was an unspoken closeness between us, but neither of us acknowledged it. Liam would glance at me from the side of his eye, then quickly look away. And me? I was still lost in the lingering echoes of the night before. Everything appeared normal, as if it were any other morning, but it wasn't. The day would pass, routines continuing as usual. Yet when night arrived, I knew nothing would remain the same. Because alcohol had a way of breaking the rules, Anderson wouldn't be back for days. Liam was still here, still with me. But waking up to find him gone, then seeing him step out of the shower and act as though nothing had changed, it planted a question inside me. Did he truly not remember? Or was he pretending? There was only one way to find out: alcohol. I devised a plan for the evening, something to help him unwind, lower his guard, and bring to the surface whatever he might be keeping buried. They say truth slips from the lips of the intoxicated, and tonight, I intended to loosen Liam's tongue. As dusk settled, I headed into the kitchen and retrieved one of the strongest bottles available. Anderson's dark amber whiskey, reserved for special occasions, untouched and gathering dust on the shelf. Entering the living room, I found Liam on the couch, his focus lost in the television. He wore one of those effortlessly casual t-shirts, his legs stretched in front of him, exuding an easy comfort. But I wanted to see him truly unravel. "How about a little relaxation tonight?" I suggested, lifting the bottle slightly. Liam arched an eyebrow at me, a small smirk forming, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. "You never really liked drinking." I shrugged. Sometimes rules need to be broken. He studied me for a brief moment, and in that silence, we both recognized what was happening. This was a game. The only question was which of us would win. Finally, he exhaled and sank deeper into the cushions. "All right, Clara, in that case, pour me a glass." I filled the glasses. The first few sips burned, heavy on the tongue. But as the conversation flowed, so did the whiskey. Glass after glass, faster each time. Soft music played in the background as we spoke of harmless things: life, future plans, his family, the house. But as the alcohol drained, our words shifted, becoming weightier. Liam's gaze was warmer now, his posture relaxed, his barriers slipping. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I downed the last drop from my glass, something inside me breaking free. Something that had been held back for far too long. The night, the alcohol, the emotions that had been circling me relentlessly, they were no longer under control. I set my empty glass on the table and met Liam's gaze. He didn't look away, but something in his expression had changed. There was hesitation, anticipation, maybe even fear. "Do you remember last night?" I asked slowly. His fingers tightened around his glass, his breath subtly hitching. That was the reaction I had been looking for. He glanced away, but I wasn't letting him slip past it. I leaned in, closing the small space between us. "Liam," I murmured, my voice slightly unsteady from the alcohol. "Tell me the truth." Liam swallowed, then lifted his head, his gaze locking onto mine. "Clara," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes burning like embers. I refused to back down. "You remember, don't you?" I pressed. "Are you pretending you forgot, or do you genuinely not recall?" Liam parted his lips, but no words came. That silence, those seconds of nothingness, seared through me. I had enough. "Of course you remember," I whispered. "That's why you won't look at me." Liam exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. Finally, he turned to face me. "I remember," he admitted. His voice was quiet, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was real. My eyes narrowed slightly, the suffocating weight in my chest unraveling into something else, something much closer to satisfaction. But it still wasn't enough. I craved more. "Last night, it felt natural having you beside me, didn't it?" I asked. In that moment, it didn't seem strange. Liam's expression darkened. "Yeah, in that moment, it didn't feel strange." "What about now?" I pressed. A brief silence followed. Liam's gaze was locked onto mine now, unable to look away. "Now it's awkward," he admitted, his tone sharpening. "Now you're pushing me, Clara." "What are you trying to do?" His voice carried frustration, but beneath it, something else lingered. A hint of vulnerability. And that was exactly what I had been waiting to hear. The heat inside me only grew stronger. Liam's fists tightened before he exhaled and unclenched them, trying to steady himself. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked, his voice rough, fatigued. "Do you just want to humiliate me more? I remember last night, okay? But you acted like it didn't matter. It felt normal then, so why the hell are you doing this now? At that moment, I saw Liam completely exposed before me. There was a flicker of surrender in his eyes, yet something inside him was still resisting. I let the fire consuming me take over, pressing my hands against the table as I locked eyes with him. Clara, he said, his voice trembling with anger, did you get me drunk just to do this to me? His gaze never wavered from mine as he spoke. He was searching, trying to understand, but by now, thinking was pointless. Without hesitating, I leaned in and kissed him. It was an eruption of every emotion I had kept bottled up. Liam stiffened at first, his hands instinctively landing on my waist as if to push me away. But he didn't. He was battling himself, but I had already won. This night was taking an entirely new direction, and we both knew it. Suddenly, I pulled away, my breathing uneven. Grabbing the whiskey bottle from the table, my fingers tightened around the cool glass. I took another sip, feeling that familiar burn sear through me. But this time, it wasn't just the alcohol setting me ablaze. Never breaking eye contact with Liam, I made my way toward the couch, my steps slow, intentional. My hands trembled slightly, but it had nothing to do with the liquor. Lowering myself onto the couch, I set the bottle beside me, my fingers still warm from holding it. Then, without thinking, I let the straps of my dress slip from my shoulders, the fabric cascading down. My gaze remained fixed on Liam, a challenge, a game, but beneath it, an unwavering certainty. I whispered, "Did you always like things to move quickly, Liam?" Liam froze, his eyes locked onto me, tracing my every movement. His chest rose and fell rapidly, as though the weight of this moment had struck him like a forceful wave. Then, gradually, he stepped forward, his hand pressing against the couch's armrest, his knee settling beside me. He leaned in. His breath was warm, deep, close. Something within me quivered, but retreating wasn't even a consideration. We were intoxicated, but that only fueled us. Liam didn't hesitate. He closed the gap. Our eyes were level, and a heat surged through me, vast and consuming. It was a kind of warmth, something I had needed. Liam seemed uncertain at first. I had just infuriated him, yet that didn't bother me in the slightest. In fact, his hesitation only thrilled me more. Liam wasn't opposed to things happening fast. He liked when things unfolded quickly. Really quickly. A violent shiver ran through me, my body trembling in response. My voice broke as I gasped. "Liam! That was incredible." I was breathless, my skin flushed. Meeting his gaze, I murmured, "This feeling? It's overwhelming, so beautiful." My voice was shaky with exhilaration. "Thank you." A small laugh escaped me. "I am glad you remembered last night," I teased. I had been about to say something about it being a little too late, but then Liam finally let go, completely. A wave of warmth surged through me, a feeling so consuming it was almost like love. He was drunk, he was drained, and before I knew it, he had fallen asleep beside me. I remained awake, sipping my drink and watching Liam, thoughts of us swirling in my mind. Thinking about what would happen next only fueled the fire inside me. I had made it this far.